For years, people have treated Principal and the Pauper like it was a moment The Simpsons crossed a line it could never come back from. And look, I get it. The episode took a character people had spent years getting attached to, pulled the rug out from under him, and said, actually, none of this mattered. That's annoying. But I've always thought the episode gets blamed for being the worst thing The Simpsons ever did, which honestly is not even close. Because if we're being serious, there are way worse episodes. Episodes that are less funny, less thoughtful, less memorable, and in some cases just flat out embarrassing. And in my opinion, the actual worst episode of The Simpsons isn't some weird 90s continuity stunt. It's Lisa Goes Gaga. TV. Now, before anyone starts sharpening their pitchforks over this, I'm not saying Principal and the Pauper is some hidden masterpiece. It is still a bad episode in many ways. What I'm saying is that people have spent so much time blaming it for ruining The Simpsons that they've kind of ignored all the other episodes that did the same thing, except worse. And the difference is that the Principal and the Pauper offended people by messing with a character people cared about, while Lisa Goes Gaga offended people by just being a terrible episode. That is a much more honest crime. So let's start with Principal and the Pauper. The reason people hate this episode is pretty easy to understand. Principal Skinner had become one of those classic Simpsons supporting characters. He was stern, weird, occasionally pathetic, and completely recognizable. Then the show suddenly reveals that he's not really Seymour Skinner at all. He's this imposter named Armin Tamzarian who stole Skinner's identity after the war. That is the kind of twist that sounds like somebody pitching a bad fan theory in a forum at 2 in the morning. And the problem is that it's not just absurd, it's that it changes the emotional foundation of the character in a way that makes years of episodes feel weird in hindsight. By that point, The Simpsons had already built up a huge audience investment. These were not just random cartoon people anymore. These were characters viewers had spent years with. So when the show suddenly says, this guy was never this actual guy, people feel like the writers just kicked over a carefully built toy set for no reason. And yeah, that is a fair complaint, but here's the thing. The episode is memorable because it's a big, dumb swing. It's controversial because it changes continuity. It's not the worst because, at least in a weird way, it's trying to do something. It has an idea, not a good idea, sure, but it's still an idea, and that already puts it ahead of a lot of later Simpsons episodes. The real issue with modern bad Simpsons episodes is not that they make a bold move, it's that they don't really have a reason to exist besides, here's a celebrity, please clap, which brings us to Lisa Goes Gaga. This episode is the exact kind of thing that makes people say the show lost its soul. Lady Gaga comes to Springfield, helps Lisa feel better about herself, and the whole thing is built around this fantasy that Lady Gaga is some kind of wise, magical pop icon who can solve the emotional problems of a cartoon character in 22 minutes, which is already a weird enough premise on its own. But the bigger issue is that it doesn't feel like The Simpsons. It feels like an extended promotional crossover that happened to have Lisa in it, and that's where the comparison gets ugly for Principal and the Pauper, because at least Principal and the Pauper is a story about characters, even if the story is dumb. Lisa Goes Gaga is a story about brand management. It's not interested in the core dynamics that make Lisa work in the first place. Old Simpsons Lisa was frustrated, cynical, embarrassed, morally stubborn, and usually one of the only people in Springfield who could see through nonsense. So if we were doing an old school Lisa episode with Lady Gaga, the obvious joke would not be Lisa becomes inspired by Gaga. The obvious joke would be Lisa rolling her eyes at Gaga while everyone else loses their minds. And that might actually feel like The Simpsons. But instead, the episode just hands Gaga a giant emotional megaphone and lets her swoop in like she's the final boss of self-esteem. It's very polished, very corporate, and honestly, very dead inside. I think part of why people still rage about Principal and the Pauper is that The Simpsons used to matter a lot more than it does today. When the show was at its peak, it wasn't just a cartoon. I mean, it was a cartoon. It was one of the main things everyone watched, quoted, argued about, and remembered. So when it messed up, people noticed. Today, there are so many more episodes, more noise around the show, more fragmented attention, and way less cultural pressure around every single installment. A bad episode now does not land with the same force because the show is no longer operating as the center of the pop culture universe. Back then, one bad decision felt like a betrayal. Nowadays, a bad episode mostly mostly just feels like a Sunday night. That's why I think people still treat Principal and the Pauper like some kind of holy catastrophe. It was a major show making a major mistake at a time when people still cared. But if we're talking about actual quality, the list of worst episodes gets very long, very fast. You have episodes that are dull, episodes that are obnoxious, episodes that are mean for no reason, episodes that feel like they were written by people who never met another human being before, and then you have the celebrity episodes, which are usually the most exhausting thing a long-running sitcom can do. They're tricky because they normally age like milk. At the time, they're supposed to feel exciting, like, oh, look, here's a famous person, look, here they are interacting with like Bart Simpson, oh, look, we spent a bunch of money and everybody agreed this was a good use of everyone's time. And then years later, it usually just feels like the show rented itself out. And so this is why Lisa Goes Gaga is just such a perfect example of a worse episode than Principal and the Pauper. It's not just bad in a vacuum, it's bad in a way that feels like the show no longer understands itself. The older Simpsons would have used Gaga as a joke or a target or a weird one-off guest appearance with some sharp lines around the edges, maybe not even voicing herself in the show. And this episode instead acts like Lady Gaga is the solution. And once a show starts treating a celebrity cameo like emotional medicine, basically admitting it's run out of ideas. That's a much deeper problem than a continuity retcon, because bad continuity can be ignored, but I think bad identity is harder to fix. The older Simpsons episodes usually worked because even when they were ridiculous, they still understood the characters. Homer was selfish, but not always stupid in the same way every time. Lisa was idealistic, but wasn't a robot. Marge had patience, not infinite patience. Bart was a menace, but not just like a catchphrase repeater. So when the show went off the rails, it still felt like it came from inside the world. With episodes like Lisa Goes Gaga, the show stops feeling like Springfield and starts feeling like a guest star showroom with jokes painted on the walls. That's why I would take a messy continuity joke over a lifeless celebrity episode any day. One is the show making a bad creative choice. The other is the show forgetting why anyone cared in the first place. And honestly, that's the bigger offense. Now, to be fair, there is one reason Principal and the Pauper gets singled out so much. It was the first time a lot of fans really felt like the show had crossed the line from weird into you're messing with the memory of these people. And that thing sticks with people, because when a show has been around long enough, viewers kind of start building their own version of the characters inside their heads. So if the show comes in and says, actually, none of that was real, it feels personal. But the episode's mistake is easy to define. It's a continuity error wearing a mustache. And that's bad, but it's also very specific. What makes Lisa Goes Gaga worse is that it's bad in a broader, more depressing way. It doesn't just make one dumb lore decision. It reflects a version of the show that no longer knows how to be funny without a celebrity delivering the premise to it. And that's why I think people are too easy on the later bad episodes. They remember the famous bad twist, but they forget the episodes that just quietly drain the life of the show. So personally, I don't think Principal and the Pauper is the worst Simpsons episodes. I think it's one of the most infamous. I think it's one of the most annoying. I think it's one of the easiest to point to if you want to explain where a certain kind of Simpsons confidence started to slip, but I don't think it's the worst episode though. The one that really feels like a show operating on fumes is Lisa Goes Gaga, because at least Principal and the Pauper was trying to do something new. Lisa Goes Gaga just wants you to nod politely while a celebrity helps a character be less herself. And somewhere in that process, The Simpsons stopped feeling like The Simpsons. That's a much bigger problem than any fake Skinner ever was. So if you ask me, the real downfall wasn't just a bizarre continuity joke. It was the slow, steady loss of everything that made the show feel alive in the first place. And that's a lot harder to laugh off.